Okay, so that's what we talked about last week. Verse 4, but as for you, Daniel, conceal these words and seal up the book until the end of time. So again, he's talking about the end of time. And really the context of the end of the time stuff started in 1136, when it starts to talk about the Antichrist. And it goes all the way down through here, all the way to this point. He says, many will go back and forth and knowledge will increase. Now, some people will teach this and they talk about this, so now we got computers and all this knowledge is increasing, but that is interpreting this passage outside the context. So what I believe it means is, because this whole context is about prophetic events in the future. And so as we get closer to the end, we will have more revelation and more understanding. In other words, the knowledge of what he's talking about here will be clearer. And we do, because we have the New Testament and we have Jesus talking about this end time, and we have Paul talking about this end time, and we have John talking about this end time, and others, Peter. So we have a lot. Knowledge did increase because he revealed much more to us about this time. So it says, then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, two others were standing, one on this bank and of the river, and the other on that bank of the river. And one said to the man dressed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, how long will it be until the end? Again, this is referring to the end. Until the end of these wonders. He says, I heard the man dressed in linen, and these are angelic beings. I heard the man dressed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, as he raised his right hand and his left toward heaven, and he swore by him who lives forever and ever, that it would be for a time, times, and half a time. Now, you've heard me say this. What you will see is when it's talking about the tribulation period, usually per context, it is either talking about the first half or the second half. So you will see in Daniel and Revelation, you'll see times, time, a half a time. You'll see 1,260 days, is that correct? 42 months, 3.5 years, that type of thing. And so the context of this is all the second half of the tribulation. Because we're talking about from the point, if you look in Daniel 11:36, then that started to talk about the Antichrist, give us his character, and then immediately it started to talk about the period in the middle where he's going to march against these other countries. He's going to enter Jerusalem. And the later information we get on this from Paul is that when he goes through Jerusalem, halfway through the tribulation, that's when he's going to go in and stop the sacrifice, break the covenant, the 7-year covenant. Halfway through, he's going to have the false prophet set up an image in the tribulation temple that they have to worship, or they're done for. So this is talking about the second half. So times, time, and a half a time is that last half. He says, and as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people, all these events will be completed. Now that's key, because this statement gives us one of the reasons that the Bible gives for the tribulation period. So what is one of the main points of the tribulation period? To break the pride of the Jewish people where they recognize their Messiah. This is key. This is why you're reading passages and it says he gave them, talking about God giving the Jews into the hand of the Antichrist, where he slaughters 2/3 of them. In other words, this is God But most people would say, this is not the God I serve. Yeah, it is. It really is. It's the same God that would send someone to hell that rejects light that's given to them, rejects Him, rejects God. Remember, we talked about Sunday. This is all about God purifying the whole universe and restoring it to pristine condition. And to do that, He has to eliminate sin from the universe. And to eliminate sin from the universe, those who reject Him have to be put into conscious torment, conscious eternal torment in another place somewhere. And so you have to look at the big picture of what's going on. And God made unconditional promises to Israel, and He will do whatever it takes to bring them to the point to where they are humbled before Him and recognize Christ as Messiah. You think He might do stuff like that to us? Well, if you've been a Christian for very long and you've not experienced the discipline of the Lord, you've been living a pretty good life, is what I'm telling you. Most of us have gone through periods of time in our life where God, sometimes drastically, God had to break us and wake us up. That is His love, too. I know we don't like to define that as love, but it really is. And so the unconditional promises He made to the Jewish people, He will fulfill those. But He will bring them to the point to where they respond to Him and accept Christ as Messiah. In fact, in the end of the tribulation, they cry out to Him because they figure it out finally. And they cry out to Him. And He returns and saves them from the Antichrist who's marching on them. Yes, ma'am.
And you say the Antichrist is going to kill a lot of the Jews. Are those the ones that accept Christ and that's the reason He's killing them? Or are these the ones that He just doesn't like Jews?
He just doesn't like Jews. It doesn't matter if they're saved or not saved.
Oh, okay.
But when we get to Revelation 12, we'll look at that whole thing. Revelation 12 starts out talking about the conflict between Satan and the Jewish people and trying to eliminate the Jewish people. You'll remember that's actually, Revelation 12 is where the Catholics get this idea of Mary being the mother of God and all this kind of stuff and the 12 stars and all this kind of stuff. We'll look at that in depth and see that obviously Mary's not the mother of God. She's the mother of Jesus, but God was around long before she birthed Jesus, right? Okay, so he goes on and he says, "As for me, I heard but could not understand. So I said, my Lord," he's addressing an angelic being, "my Lord, what will the outcome of these events?" And he said, "Go your way, Daniel, for these words are concealed and sealed up until the end time." In other words, you're not going to get an answer right now. Daniel's like us. You get a partial understanding of what the Bible says, and you want to know the rest of the story. Yes. And Daniel he wants to know, this is his people. This is his future, the future of his nation. He wants to know what this means, exactly what this means. And some of this he never really totally understood. You realize the prophets many times received things. They didn't totally understand them, but they wrote them down. They understood some, but God's point was not revelation to them sometimes. It was revelation that they wrote down that later generations started to understand, or it happened to them, or, So in verse 10 it says, "Many will be purged, purified, and refined." And again, the context is still talking about the Jews here. Purged, purified, and refined. So some will be purged, and some will be purified and refined. If you have a pen there, write down Zechariah 13:9. But the wicked will act wickedly, and none of the wicked will understand, but those who have insight will understand. This is the same statement, different way to say it, as we see all throughout the Bible. If you have eyes to see, let them see. If they have ears to hear, let them hear. In other words, people who are spiritually, people who have put faith in God, people who have spiritual insight because the Spirit of God lives in them, they understand. But the wicked, remember, Paul said, the unbeliever is blind. He can't understand the things of God. 1 Corinthians 2:14. It says, from the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished, so this is that halfway through the tribulation, the sacrifice is abolished. Paul tells us that he's going to go in, he's going to declare himself God. Later in Revelation, I think it's 13, is where it talks about the beast and the false prophet, and the false prophet that actually will create an image that is very human-like, that can talk and stuff, some miraculous things. All this will happen here from the time, but he's given us a chronological key here. From the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up. This is the term that Jesus used in Matthew 24, referring to this. And then, and back in Daniel 9, we saw this abomination. And the abomination is him setting himself up in the temple. That's the abomination. Zechariah 13:9. Yeah. So it says, and the abomination of desolation is set up. There will be 1,290 days. And then he says, how blessed is he who keeps waiting and attains to the 1,335 days.
What do those extra days pertain?
Okay, we're going to talk about that. You have a handout. Let me see. If I can find mine, I'll show it to you. It's kind of a chart. And we'll look at this again down the road. It's called the time between the end of the tribulation and the millennium.
Yeah.
So we've just seen in this chapter, he talks about the times, and half a time. So a times, half a time, I think I'm getting this timing right, is 12,060 days. 1,260 days. Okay? That's 3.5 years of 360 day years, right? Some of you guys can do this math like that. Your pastor never could, never will, probably. You'll be able to do it that fast. But that's the timing. So now he's talking about time beyond that. First he says how long? 1,290 days? And that's 30 days beyond. And then he says how much? 1,300 and something? Yeah.
1390?
Yeah.
1335?
So this is, we don't have a lot of revelation on this.
Yeah, 1,335 days.
But this is at least people that are pre-mill, pre-tribulationists, most of them believe, because this seems to tie that time right past the 12, the time times half the time.
Right.
So you have 1260, and then you have 30 more days that something obviously happens. And then he says the people that are really blessed is the ones that make it all the way to 1335. So you're scratching your head and you're saying, what is going on?
Yeah. That's 45 more days.
45 more days. And so,
3 more miles for 2.5 more.
so this is what we believe. This is what we believe. If you're looking at this chart, it says the time between the end of the tribulation and the millennium. Okay, if you're looking at this, okay, you should just think about this. Okay, we have the time, half a time, so we know we've made it to the end of the tribulation. And what's going on in these 75 extra days? So probably what's going on is Daniel 12:11 talks about the abomination of desolation, that has to be removed. Isn't that what it says? Removing it?
Move it,
Yeah. So that has to be dealt with, you know, the image. The real guy's already gone. You know, remember in Revelation 19, he returns, and I'm assuming immediately is the way it looks in Revelation 19. He returns in the second coming, and immediately he takes the Antichrist, the false prophet, and he casts him into the lake of fire. So as far as I can see, biblically, they're the first occupants of the lake of fire. There are others that are in hell right now, and that'll be dumped in at the end of the millennium, if you remember. But also, when we read passages about the millennial kingdom, we see that even though mankind still has a sin nature, everything else has been reversed on the curse. So we don't have carnivorous animals. We don't have poisonous snakes. Just extrapolating that, you know, in Genesis 3 it talks about the thin thorns and the thistles and the serpent crawling on his belly, and all this is being part of the curse. Those are descriptions of what resulted in the curse, and we know a lot of others, you know. So all of that has to be fixed, if you will. This isn't eternity, remember, this is just the millennial kingdom. But the curse will be reversed. That's number 2 on your list down there. You also have, okay, once he casts the Antichrist, the false prophet, in the lake of fire there in Revelation 19. If you go back to what Jesus said in the Olivet Discourse, at the end of Matthew 25, we have those separation of sheep and goats. And what that is he calls all the nations before him. And he separates believer from unbeliever in the nations. These are the people that are left that survived all this stuff. So that's the sheep and goats. And you remember at the end of that, he put some in hell, and the other ones he said, enter kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the earth. So that judgment has to take place. Now, I don't know how long he got, you know, it doesn't give us a time frame. It just gives us, these 75 days is the only clue in the Bible. So he's got to do that. So you have the judgment of the Gentiles. You also have the resurrection of the Old Testament saints that we just looked at, and Isaiah 26:19 talks about that as well. Why are you raising the Old Testament saints? Because we saw in Matthew that he talked about the Gentiles will actually come and sit down and eat supper with Abraham. You remember that passage in Matthew? So the Old Testament saints will be resurrected, and they will receive their reward, which is the actual messianic reign that they have looked forward to for so long. So they'll receive that. So they'll be raised. Then you have in Revelation 20, before the millennium kingdom comes in, you have the resurrection of what we call the tribulation saints, which are people that entered the tribulation, they got saved, and they got killed. And so they will be raised. That's Revelation 20, verse 4. And then you have the Messiah organizes his government. And we have keys to how that government's organized all through the Bible. In fact, if I've not given you the chart that shows that laid out, I have at some point in the last 10 years, almost 11 years. I think maybe I did something on Sunday morning on that. But I'll try to get that for you and give you that. Where in the Bible it talks about him having princes. First, let me just remind you of things that we've studied over the last couple of years. You remember he told the apostles, you'll be sitting on 12 thrones ruling over the 12 tribes of Israel. You remember that, Matthew? Because Peter said, "Guys, we've given up everything. What do we give?" And he said, "This is what's going to happen." So the apostles that were Jewish, and all of them were, they will be ruling over the nation of Israel during the tribulation, during 1,000 years.
That's because they're earthly.
Yeah, yeah,
Promises are earthly.
yes, yeah,
That would make the elders of heaven church.
yes, absolutely. So what about us Gentiles? Well, the church will actually rule over the Gentile nations. So we've already seen that. You go all the way back to 1 Corinthians 6. Remember, we get a little glimpse into that because in the Corinthian church, you'd have two brothers have some kind of conflict. Well, they'd take it to secular court. And Paul said, "What are you doing? I mean, we're going to judge angels. We're gonna judge people during the millennial kingdom. I mean, we're the only ones qualified to judge within the church. Why are you going to a secular court over this?" And so we also in our study of Revelation so far, in Revelation 2 and 3, there are a couple of mentions of the fact that we're going to co-reign with Christ during that millennial kingdom. And remember, we're in glorified bodies. The Old Testament saints will be glorified bodies, and the tribulation saints will be glorified bodies. So all of that taking place, and another not too small of a thing that will happen during that period of time is you have a millennial temple. It's described in Ezekiel. That will have to be constructed before Christ, the Messiah, sits on the throne there in that temple, in the Holy of Holies. And again, I have some charts on that because when God gave that to Ezekiel, He gave great detail on how big it was going to be and where it was going to be and all that kind of stuff. And river flowing out of by the throne and all this incredible stuff. All of that I just mentioned, that all has to happen before the Messianic reign gets here. And so you look at all of that and you say, that's probably what's going to be going on in those 75 years. 75 days. I'm sorry.
Rusty,
Yes, ma'am.
just a little bit of miscellaneous, I just
Sure.
read the other day, this morning in fact, that Texas shipped 5 red heifers to Israel.
Somebody sent that to me. You may have sent it to me. Somebody sent it to me. It was very interesting.
Yes.
And they were pretty excited when they got there. I
Well,
heard.
it was part of the purification process for the temple. The temple isn't built,
Right.
but that
Right.
sacrifice, those 5 perfect red heifers.
Yes.
Yeah, they came from Texas.
Yay.
They arrived
That's
safe
just
and
cause
sound
you get to
in
heaven.
Israel. Sounded kind of getting close to me.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and you can see politically, I believe it'll get so bad for Israel as the U.S. turns on them. I believe it'll get so bad that there'll be such pressure from the liberal forces in Israel when this guy shows up and offers them peace, they will be ready to take it, unfortunately. But as we're seeing that, God will use that to purify them, and they'll recognize Christ as Messiah. So that is chapter 12. As you've seen, if you didn't know by now, if you didn't know before this, you know now that this is why you almost have to study the book of Daniel to understand the book of Revelation. There's just so much information that fits hand in glove with the book of Revelation. So, as Dr. Walford used to say, it's the skeleton on which all this other stuff fits, So anyway, Okay, so jumping back over to Revelation chapter 4, and we will finish up with that, and then next week we will do. We'll start on Revelation 5, and so you can go ahead and read Revelation 5. You have my notes for Revelation 5, so you can look through that, and if you have questions, you can be prepared. But you remember, just a quick overview, what we have in Revelation chapter 4 is we have the church mentioned in chapters 2 and 3, and then the church is not mentioned again, literally not mentioned. The word church is not used again until chapter 22, although we see a description of the church in Revelation 19 as we return with Christ, and you have the marriage of the Lamb in Revelation 19. So John, although John may not be literally representing the church, he is taken into heaven and shown the throne room in Revelation 4 and 5 just before the tribulation period. Okay, so that's what's going on here, and we saw that he saw first, and by the way, Revelation 4 focuses on the Father. In Revelation 5 focuses on the Son, the Lamb of God. So that's what we're going to see. And so you see, we looked at the throne room, and there's this wonderful description of the throne. Somebody that was sitting on the throne. I'm not going to go through all of that. In front of the throne, or around the throne, there were the 24 thrones with 24 elders. I believe, and I've given you a handout that gives my biblical defense of the fact that is the church, raptured, rewarded with your crowns, with our robes, all that stuff that's promised. You have 4 living creatures. I believe those to be a type of angelic being. You know, if you read the Bible from cover to cover, you see that there's a lot of different kinds of angelic beings. There's not just one plain Jane angelic being. These have different faces. If you look at the ones that Ezekiel saw, they had a face here, a face here, a face here, and a face here. So they're different, you know. And you see the seraphim that are mentioned in Isaiah 6, and they had 6 wings. You know, they could cover their face, their inner part. I mean, their center of their body and their feet. So there's all kinds of. I mean, we may just walk around and look at angels for days once we get to heaven. Like, whoa, you know. Some of the angelic beings, at least when they appear to people, they look like men. You remember, just as an example, the ones on the day of Pentecost, not Pentecost, but the Ascension, when Jesus ascended, and he's, Luke's writing, he says those 2 men dressed in white, and from the context is obvious these are angelic beings. Daniel has called an angelic being a man that was standing by him. So lots of different description of angelic beings. God's very creative, as we see here on earth, with plants and trees and animals and all kinds of stuff. And us, there's no exact copy of any of us. None. He didn't ever have to repeat himself. So he's pretty creative. And so it talks about the 4 living creatures. It says that their job is to sit around the throne of God and say, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God, the Almighty, who was and who is to come." That is what they do. All day, every day, they do that. And He's worthy of that. You know, He really is. And then verse 9 says, and when the living creatures gave glory and honor and thanks to him who sits on the throne, to him who lives forever, the 24 elders that it already talked about, now it spotlights them again. The 24 elders will fall down before him who sits on the throne and will worship him who lives forever and ever, and will cast their crowns before the throne, saying, worthy are you, our Lord and our God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and because of your will they existed and were created. And so they are worshiping, in this instance, the Father. So all of this is focused on worship of the Father. And most theologians have pointed out, and I think it's a very logical conclusion, if this is the church and they fall down and they throw the crowns at God's feet, it's because they realize we don't deserve these, you do. And if you understand how the rewards and all of that stuff works, the rewards that the church is given at the judgment seat of Christ are rewards of things that were done selflessly. In other words, they were done out of motivation and love for the Lord, and they were done through the power of the Spirit of God. So he should get the credit for that. In other words, he animates us to do godly things, righteous things. He animates us to do that. Yes, we make a choice between the flesh and the Spirit, but when we choose the Spirit and we do those things that bring him glory in our life, we will be, that's what we're rewarded for. So it makes sense when you're standing before the God who animated you and made you able to do those things. He's the one that should get the credit, not you. So that's what's going on here as we close this out. And remember, he's look at what they're doing. Worthy are you, Lord, our God, to receive glory and honor and power. You're the Creator. We exist because of your will. If it was not for your will, we wouldn't even exist. You're the one that created us. So you deserve everything. You deserve all of the worship. And so we close out chapter 4 there, and we will pick up chapter 5. And in the very beginning of chapter 5, this scroll is kind of started to be focused on. And that's kind of the center until the Lamb appears, who's worthy to open the scroll. And so we'll look at all of that next time.
You know what amazes me when he said,
Yes, sir.
John saw that he announced the Lion of the tribe of Judah, but he looked and saw a lamb.
Yes, isn't that interesting? There's a lot of symbolism. Now, what you have to understand is this is really what John saw. So he recorded exactly what he saw, but obviously the literal thing that he saw looked the way it looked to communicate symbolically a truth, right? And so as we talked about, I don't think you were here, Milton, when we talked about the fact that one scholar has estimated there's about 660 allusions in the book of Revelation to the Old Testament. And so to understand the book of Revelation, you really need to understand the Old Testament. And doesn't that make sense? If God has, like we talked about before, if God has progressively revealed himself, I mean, you don't go into a college exam and read the last chapter in the book that you're going to be tested over the whole book, especially if the knowledge builds on itself like the Bible does. So it makes sense, the last book, you really need to understand all of this to be able to interpret this properly. And Tommy I says that what Revelation does is it takes all this prophetic truth that hadn't been fulfilled yet from throughout the Bible, Old and New Testament, and it puts it all together in a way that we can see it and understand how it's going to be fulfilled. And it really does. We'll see that as we continue to go through. So, all right. Rick, can you close us with a word of prayer, please, sir?